my friends. Welcome to another episode of the Launch Sequence podcast. This week, we're going to be talking about server meshing. We got an update on this a couple of weeks ago, and it has always been a pretty big topic for the game in general. But today, I've got a friend, somebody who has been working on a presentation to help kind of give more context to how server meshing came to be. Somebody with a lot of knowledge on the topic, Unobtainium, a community member. Thank you for joining me today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we've got a lot to go over. We're going to start with, I want to hear more about you. I think people would love to hear about why you know about all this stuff and kind of where you come from. And then we'll dive straight into kind of the recent updates they've given us and a little bit more about what we can expect from server meshing in the next couple of years based on, of course, everything that we know. We're not in CIG, but
of course.
Yeah. So,
Sounds
Unobtainium.
good.
What inspired you to make this presentation about server meshing? Let's start with that.
I think I followed the development of the game since 2013, and it always interested me what they were up to in terms of the game engine, and read most of their stuff and watched most of their episodes. And yeah, eventually I thought there's so much information, there's a lot of detail and interconnectedness that fascinated me. And I wanted to share that, but there was never like one central place where someone could look up this information. So
Yeah.
I guess I did it myself. Yeah.
It has been like looking up things on server meshing. I would say up until, I think, like CitizenCon 2021, when they did that presentation on server meshing, it was basically like if you wanted to know about it, you had to search the whole internet to find all the little pieces where they've mentioned it before.
Indeed, yeah. There was like a couple of wikis, but I felt like there was so much more info to share. And
Yeah.
I wanted to make it more visually appealing, like something coherent in the explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was the goal, I guess.
And for those who are watching the video format of this podcast, we'll actually put the presentation on the screen. So when you hear us talking about it, we'll give you some insight and some looks into it. But it will also be linked down below. So it's in the show notes for the audio platform on the videos. So if you guys want to click into it, follow along, save it for later, feel free to hit that link below. So you kind of give us some context as to why you made the resource, but I'd actually like to take a step back because a lot of people might not know exactly what server meshing is. Can you give a brief breakdown of kind of what it is and how it's supposed to help with Star Citizen?
Yeah, sure. I guess server meshing is supposed to help compute the game world. Like when we play, we usually are simulated, at least in a multiplayer game, right? We are simulated by a server, and usually the clients just follow what the server says. And in our case, we wanted to have like a large game world, a universe,
Yeah.
where thousands of players ideally could play in the same game world. And usually one game server can't handle that. So the idea is to use multiple game servers and share the load. Each game server would like take over one little section of the game world and compute that. And yeah, when necessary, those game servers exchange information with each other to make, for example, transitions between servers possible, or also have game objects interact with each other, even though they are simulated on different game servers.
Okay. So
Yeah.
basically what the name says, like they're literally meshing
Yes.
servers together. And you said that they connect to each other so that they can share data between one another. And that kind of eliminates loading screens, right? It's like real-time sharing of data so that you could just transition to another part of a star system, see another 1,000 people and not have to like wait for it to all load in.
Yeah, sure. That's also part of it, I think. It's like also what object container streaming was about, right?
Right.
Which essentially was about loading parts of the world after the initial loading screen.
Hmm.
Um, and that usually happens in the background. So like there is no stuttering or background loading background or something else in the way. And yeah, server meshing is more like really distributing the simulation load.
Okay.
And I guess getting that right requires those transitions to be seamless. Yeah, that would be
And
great.
and there
Yeah.
are, as you mentioned, object container streaming. There are a lot of little bits and pieces that like have been getting developed over the last 5 years or so to lead up to this point of server meshing, right?
Mhm. Yes, correct. It's actually, I think it's already started in 2014.
Oh
That's
wow.
when they first started working on the zone system, and that is kind of the basis for a lot of other tech systems that came later.
Okay.
I think it's most known from as a grid or like a physics system. I think that's also built on top of the zone system.
It's been a
But
long time.
yeah,
we're gonna and
yeah, but
we're
yes,
gonna
yes.
get more into the details of the little things that have led up to server meshing.
Mhm.
But I would like to go back into tackling kind of what the most recent update is. Before we get into that, though, I do want to have you kind of share with everybody where you're coming from in terms of your background,
Of
why
course.
you know what you know about this kind of stuff.
Mhm. Yes, I studied computer science, and I also did programming uh, before, like as a hobby. And yeah, it's always fascinated me how games work. I always read up on it. And yeah,
Okay.
I guess that also was what drew me in and kept me in.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And you've just been basically learning kind of. Have you been learning server meshing while Star Citizen's been teaching it? Did you have some background in networking programming before?
No, I don't. Not at all.
Okay.
I mostly used this opportunity to learn as well.
Okay.
Well, many things I had to research and look up, and a lot of stuff was also still new to me. I had
And
to
I'm sure.
make sense of.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
Uh, it's okay. I think we just have a little bit of delay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, but there's some basically some crossover between what you do and what they're talking about with this stuff.
yeah. Of course, it's like games are still software. There are like some fundamental things are still the same.
Hmm.
You still have to operate on what the CPU is capable of. And yeah, I think there are some differences between other industry fields. Uh, Many applications don't necessarily need to be this real time. Um, you can get away with some aspects a little bit
Right.
more.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
actually that's a good point because I hear people talk about how the technology behind server meshing is similar to something people might use in finance or something like that,
Mm.
and a game that has to update what 30 times a second and do all this crazy stuff might not be the same as something that has to update a ledger or just a simple
Mm.
number or something a
Mm.
couple times a minute.
Of course. I'm not sure. I'm not that deep into finance software. I
Hmm.
guess I also have to be fast, right? So like money. Money is always a
Nah,
factor
money's not
that
important.
requires software to be good.
We don't care
But
about
yeah,
money, just
that's,
JPEGs.
yes. But there is a lot of like backend software nowadays used, like especially social media websites,
Right.
which are also highly scalable. Something that Star Citizen also strives for
We
their
hope
backend.
for. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about the recent update we got with server meshing. So, up until this year, the goal mainly has been to get persistent entity streaming out as like the big sort of leading feature getting us into server meshing. And now that we finally are starting to see it in PTU, hopefully live on the server soon for everybody to play, the company is starting to shift their talk towards server meshing. And we've gotten our first real summit from everyone around the globe who's involved in one room, sort of hashing out the last steps in this hopefully year lead up to the feature. What was your takeaway from this recent update we got on server meshing?
It was interesting. We got some little bits and pieces from that already. Um, was nice to see them all in the same place, talking to each other. I think we didn't see that before.
Hmm.
So nice. It was nice to see Clive again and Benoit and oh no, all the other names I forgot it.
There's a
I
lot of
think
people.
Christoph Bolte. Yeah, that's some couple names that have been around for years,
Right.
which is nice.
So
Nice to know
based
that they're still there.
and based on what they were talking about, let's say the last time you saw Clive or Benoit talking about server meshing, I think this is probably 2021 CitizenCon or sometime recently after
Hmm.
that. How does it sound like their plans have changed since then?
I'm not sure if they changed much for server meshing itself. Maybe for the rollout, the initial rollout. It seems they want to get the jump points working first, or like the handoffs within jump points, and how jump points work on the technical side of things. It seems like jump point is also like its own zone, I guess, which you have to transfer in and out of.
So yeah, I actually was wondering about that because that part confused me a little bit. Does it sound like they're saying that you will have zones that are handled by server meshing in a star system, and then the jump point itself between star systems will also be their own servers or something like that?
I'm not sure if it will be if the jump point itself will be handled by a separate server. I think it will be also handled by one of the two servers that handle the solar systems, at
Okay,
least
yeah.
initially. But yeah, I think the plan is that server meshing is possible anywhere in the level, not just in jump points. But it seems to get the pyro system online, they want to get that working first and then move on to get server meshing working in other parts of the level.
Okay. And this was also kind of wrapped up in talk about, like you said, their rollout, the difference between static and dynamic server meshing. And it sounds like they're almost talking about getting Pyro out to players even before they might get static server meshing ready to go. And beforehand, we were
Mm.
kind of not sure if that was possible. Was that what you were hearing from their presentation?
I'm actually not quite sure yet. I would like to wait for more information. But
Hmm.
yeah, it might be that they want to get something simpler out the door first and then tackle static server meshing. On the other hand, it would also make sense to get as much functionality of static server meshing online already. They can test that in such an isolated environment and then move on to more complex situations. So yeah, I'm not sure.
So
I'm
do you feel
interested in
like
the second part.
the presentation itself wasn't enough information?
Um, yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not quite 100% certain how they want to roll it out. I wish they were less vague on that front. I
Less
think
vague?
it, yes,
Yeah.
like they said they wanted to split the jump point logic from the server machine logic, but I wished they had gone into more detail already. But I guess
Yeah.
that will be the other parts.
Well, let's talk about detail. I'm actually going to pull up your presentation here for everybody who is watching, um,
Mhm.
and I think we should start. Let's give everybody a little timeline. So here it is. All right. So let's give everyone a little timeline of kind of how this has all gone down. You said
Mhm.
it seemed to have started around 2014. What was kind of the initial technology that they were doing back then?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think the zone system was something that was worked on very early. I think that was later followed up with object containers and some other fundamental engine reworks. It's like I think most of the stuff began like early 2015, and which also started working toward Planetech, first Planetech. Once they got those 64-bit level coordinates working, they could create large worlds, large planets seamlessly. Go
This was
from
using this mega map thing?
No, it's this 64-bit coordinates. Yes,
Okay.
this one above. Uh, and this allowed them to get more precision by using more bits in the memory for coordinate values. And yeah,
And
most
that
of the stuff
was
is still around these days. Yeah.
the 64-bit conversion. I remember people talking a lot about that and hearing that it was kind of something that some video games would do, but most didn't really need that kind of
Yeah.
detail, right? Because they
Yeah.
weren't so large, or
Yeah.
why is that?
Most games are fine with like a couple kilometers in size. You will only usually need like 4 to 8 kilometers in each direction.
Okay.
And yeah, but in our case, that would lead to issues because the further out you go from the origin of the coordinate system, the less precision you get, and things start to look very weird. Stuff moves and jiggles around. It's yeah.
Okay. So we got 64-bit precision. This helped them start rolling out planets. Um,
Mhm.
and then we got 3.0. And I think most people who are around back then remember just how terrible the game was when we started getting planets and they hadn't quite figured out how to help optimize that process. So, what was the next step in line to make the performance a little bit better after that?
Mhm. Yeah, I think 3.0 was a big deal. I think there was like a lot of fundamental engine reworks done already, which took a lot of time, like from 2015 to end of 2017. But I think a lot of issues, like we had a lot of stuttering and low frame rate. That was kind of annoying, let's say.
Very.
And yeah, I think they wanted to get client object container streaming out the door with 3.18. I think that was the plan initially, but
Three.
because they
Wait,
needed
three.
more
You
time.
said 318?
Sorry, 3.0.
Okay. I was gonna say,
Was spoke.
huh?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It took a while on that.
Nope, nope. Yes, but they had to develop that a little bit later, so it came out like around a year later.
Yeah, and it came out with the
And that
first city, I think, right?
I don't actually remember. Yeah, maybe. I
I think it
think
was a
prior it was just Port Aliza and a couple moons of
right.
Crusader, right? Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So during that time, we also got to hear about some things. I remember definitely hearing about network bind culling and
Yes.
serialized variables. So these were, and you'd actually, if you go back in Reddit history and you see the conversations that took place around these back in the day when
Mm.
people would talk about this, you would hear a lot of people say, "Hey, this is just like marketing lingo. They're trying to label things as special so that it seems a little bit more distracting." But it does seem like each of these had a point leading up until server meshing, right?
Yes. I think each term here has like its own functionality. Uh, I don't think you can deny that, but I'm not sure if there are like other industry terms for these functionalities.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
So
don't know.
they're things that you recognize, but not necessarily under the same name.
Uh, yes. Although I don't know necessarily know the names other
Yeah,
companies use. Oh,
I
yeah.
get that. So what is entity bind culling?
I think it's was about loading object containers dynamically. Essentially, the server would let the clients know which object containers they need to load. Like prior to client object container streaming, each client had to load the entire game world on initial loading screen.
Hmm.
And with client object container streaming, that wasn't necessary anymore. You just had to load like a little bubble around the client, and afterwards the server was able to tell you if something came into view or if you moved around the level, that it would load the level in front of you, and I guess also unload everything behind you.
Okay.
Yeah, and that already improved a lot of performance issues. I think that was very
Yeah.
impactful,
That
improved frame rate a lot.
I remember that being in my mind, with retrospect, this is silly, but back then I remember thinking, wow, so the game's actually starting to get optimized. Like, I remember going from like maybe 8 or 10 frames per second average up to
Hmm.
almost 20. And it was like, that's not a big deal, but it was double the frame rate at the time, and it felt so much better.
Hmm. Yes. I think they improved like a lot of the background loading. They did multi-threaded it and pushed it off the main thread. We hear about the main thread a lot. I
Yes.
think it was always uh, I think initially a lot of the logic was running on the main thread, and since these fundamental reworks, more and more logic has been moved out of the main thread into other threads, which
And
could
this
run in
is
different CPU cores and help with
and
performance.
and that's kind of similar to what the engine team is doing with the rendering, right? With the Gen 12 improvements, they've talked about getting all of that stuff off of the main thread.
Uh, no, I believe there's also another thread called the render thread.
Right.
That was always responsible for rendering the game. Like you can simulate and render kind of in parallel at the same time. While one frame is rendered, you can already simulate the next frame, I believe. And yeah, but it's essentially the same issue. You just have one render thread, and yeah, that doesn't scale very well. So
Gets
if you
bottlenecked.
can, yes, if you can multi-thread the logic there as well, then you can get more frames, which is
Okay.
nice.
Yes. Very nice. We like that. Thanks,
Yes.
CIG. Um, so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Oh
Uh,
no.
back in 2018, when we got client-side object container streaming, and we knew that this was supposed to eventually lead to server meshing, what were your expectations for how long server meshing, let's say like in the most basic form, might take from there?
Mm. Uh, I don't actually know back then. I was just still concerned about getting server OTS out the door, right? That was the next goal aimed at by CRG. Of course, there was always plans for server meshing after that, I think. It was always something that I think it was already started worked on right after client OCS.
Hmm.
Like a lot of the networking folks moved on to server OCS, I think. And yeah, I thought it was going. They shared some information back then. We already knew about static server meshing. That they wanted to get like a first simpler version out the door.
Hmm.
And yeah, but I think they underestimated the streaming of the data and persistence a little bit. So yeah,
As one
that's why.
does.
Yeah, of course. So, but I thought it would take like a couple years, 1 or 2. Like most big engine tech took like 2 to 3 years max. So I thought that would be also in line for server meshing.
Okay.
Yeah. But later we knew we had to rework their approach
Right.
for both persistence and server meshing.
So let's talk about that, because that I think is a big thing that gets missed in this discussion when you say, hey, they've been talking about server meshing for what, 8 years now, almost.
Mm.
And just like with game development, it's easy to think that that means that it was just getting developed in a straight line the whole time. But it seems like around maybe 2019-ish, they had a bit of a change in how server meshing was working.
Uh, yeah, I think no. I think 2019 they still wanted to do their initial plans.
Okay.
Once I had like a couple prototypes worked out or tested even in engine, then they noticed like at the end of 2020, I believe, that it didn't really work well. So they had like um, complete a meeting and planned the architecture differently. I think that's where we got the replication layer in place and also the graph database for persisting
Hmm.
the
So
game state. Yes. Mhm.
So that actually might explain a little bit why possibly marketing got ahead of engineering in 2019 when they started to introduce the idea of Pyro.
Yeah, of course. That's a I think the plan was to release it at the end of 2020, but once they figured out that it wasn't going to live up to the performance requirements, I think that was the main issue. Yeah, they had to rethink and get back to the drawing board and try out something different. I
Ha-
think that's what they have been working on. And
I've
we start to see the first results in 3.18, I think. Yeah.
and
Oh,
they've been
no,
nice.
actually. Yeah. Actually, some stuff came out in patches earlier, but it was mostly like feature parity, meaning that the software still does the same thing like it did prior, but with new capabilities that would be used later.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Basically just it's kind of like what they did with the whole building block stuff. Like the UI would look the same, but it was running on a
Mm.
different system.
Yeah, although it does look nicer now. I don't think it was great with the Flash.
So I think there's definitely different camps of thinking when it comes to open development and sharing information. I feel like if you want a completely open development, obviously you would want to know at 2020 when they realized this wasn't working, you'd want to know that you want to hear them come out and say, "Hey, we tried this, we thought it was going to work. It's not. We have to figure out something new." But then there's also the idea that like you kind of want them to have a replacement already ready to show you when they tell you they don't know, just to kind of
Mm.
keep your confidence up. How do you think they handled the communication around the changing of both the iCache and sort of entity graph system and server meshing in the replication layer?
Mhm. Yeah, I think we heard about the entity graph mid 2021 the first time. I think we saw it on the roadmap or progress tracker, I believe,
Yeah,
already. Yeah, but it took a while for them to openly say that they were changing up server meshing, how it would work. Like at least on a technical front, like how it will feel to us would still be the same. But on the communication front, yeah, it's tricky. I think I personally like that they are open and telling us that they are still doing research and development R&D on most of the stuff. That they are still looking at the data they get from their implementations and figuring out the next steps. I think that's a good thing. I would be more worried if they said, yeah, we know exactly how it's going to work and we push through no matter what. I think that would be a terrible idea. I want them to adapt to new insights they are making. But yeah, in terms of communication, of course, it's always bad to say, hey, we currently kind of scrapped our initial implementation and have nothing new. We start from scratch, because that's always a little bit disappointing
yeah,
and a lot
yeah.
of uncertainty around it. And I think uncertainty is a lot of gets people heated up real quick. I think that's the way to put it.
I mean, we're gamers.
People, yes,
We're here
people
to
are
like,
invested and want
yeah.
to know that everything is going fine and we get this game into our hands. I think that's yeah.
It's an interesting situation because you can see it like it's the stuff that was happening with this 2020 we kind of weren't hearing much about it, and like you said we started to see things about the entity graph on the monthly report. We heard about the super p cache, we heard about the
Yes.
iCache, and we were like, what is all this stuff up until that CitizenCon episode, and that whole idea of uncertainty and like the players wanting to know what's going on, but also wanting to make sure that CIG also knows what's going on. I can feel that now. You can kind of get that same sense leading up to server meshing and with other things like the quantum economy. And it's just such an interesting part of following this game.
Hmm. I think it's also tricky. When do you communicate something to us with us? Uh, when you are still figuring things out, right? You could one day try out this implementation and another day the other one. Like, at which moment do you know, hey, this is looking promising? This is it. And I think it's tricky. I think it's a difficult problem to solve. Of
Yeah.
course, I would always nice to hear every single minute change in direction. But I think maybe that isn't wise or very interesting in general.
It could also lead to some pretty crazy headlines.
Yes.
Star Citizen developer admits they have no clue what they're doing 10 years after development starts. I
Yes.
could see it already. But I do think that the recent stuff with 318 and persistent entity streaming has given people some more confidence in that they are able to get through these problems and find a solution to it. How have you felt about persistent entity streaming since you started to see it in practice?
I think it's working very well. I think it's good. I think there are some little features surrounding it that are still missing. Like the actual persistence functionality seems to work very well. We can see any object being persisted, or actually not all. Like some of them, like the player, actually, there's still some work left. Yeah, I think given enough time, more and more features surrounding persistence will come online. And especially once we get like bigger charts, people can always join back the chart they previously played on. I think that will be huge as well for persistence. So there's still some connectedness between persistence and server meshing and getting those larger shards online.
Right. So I think the big terms that people might want to know when it comes to this stuff, besides all of the insane amount of other little tiny services that are included, are the entity graph and the replication layer. And those have been talked about a lot when it comes to server meshing too. Could you give some context as to how those work their way into server meshing?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think in terms of persistence, we have the entity graph, and yeah, which essentially is like two parts. We actually got some more information recently about that. It seems to be like horizontally scalable services, which sit between, I guess, the game server or the replication layer and the database. And they facilitate like the queries to the database. And we have like also a graph database, which stores all the information. Like that's actually the persistence where data is written onto the drive and doesn't get lost if the database crashes or the game server crashes. So yeah, the graph database is a big deal, I think.
So
But yes. Mhm.
is the entity graph kind of like storage, or like if we were going to make this a metaphor for computers, would the entity graph be like the game's storage or its memory?
Yes, more like it's storage.
Okay.
If you write something down into a book, then it's stored there. You don't have to save it into your memory, right? It's
Okay.
like taking notes. Yeah.
Hmm.
I think it also has its memory too, but it's getting too technical. I think it has like saves data in memory to make it performant.
Okay.
It's like yeah.
So then tell us about the replication layer. What does that do for server meshing?
Yes, this is a service that sits between the game servers and the clients, and it's essentially, I guess, object container streaming on steroids. There's a lot of logic from object container streaming in there. It is going to send data between the clients and the servers. It decides where data has to go. It also sends this data to the graph database, the entity graph database. So it gets persistence while we are playing. And I think looking toward static server meshing, it's yeah, essentially the glue that holds the mesh together, I would say.
So the replication layer basically just makes sure that everything that goes to the entity graph is also everywhere else.
Uh, Not quite. It's actually the replication layer makes a request to the graph database
Hmm.
and loads some of that information into its own memory. And from there, it can decide which of that which data has to be loaded on which game server and on which client. And once that is done, it can move
Okay.
data around.
Little brain picking stuff up and throwing it other places.
Yes, exactly. It's like a mediator between all participants.
Okay.
That's a good way to put it.
What I would like to know now, before we get deeper into, because we've gone through kind of the timeline at this point. We started in 2014 or so, talked about object container streaming in 2017, 2018, server-side object container streaming, and now the push towards persistent entity streaming in 2023. Before we jump further into the future now, I want to hear from you kind of, how do you see both the persistence and server meshing fitting into the industry? Is it actually a big deal? Is it unique to Star Citizen? Is it something that you see going on in other places? Can you give us some context?
Mm-hmm. Of course. There are actually some other projects in the works for a while. I think also around the time CIG started working on this. We have, for example, most commonly known Spatial OS, which is also
Which
similar
one's
to
that?
dynamic server meshing. Spatial OS.
Oh, Spatial OS.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Spatial OS. Yes. And we also have Hadion Ether Engine, I believe. That's also something doing
Ether?
similar. Yes, Ether.
I have not heard of
It's
that.
like as in heaven, I believe.
Okay.
And then we have Coherence, is something new, I believe. I'm not sure if that already is public or still internal development. And I think even Ubisoft Scala sounded a little bit like dynamic server meshing, but we don't have a lot of info on that yet.
Ubisoft.
Yes, I believe so.
That I wouldn't expect that. That would be very interesting to see a big publisher like that with technology like this.
Indeed. It was a bit explained a bit differently, but might work also same way. Same way, you have multiple servers and split up the simulation load between them.
Okay. So the technology isn't necessarily unique in gaming, but it does sound like it's fairly new.
Yes, indeed. It's something that popped up around 2014, 2015. People moved into that area more and more. But it's like still a rather new technology for video gaming, I would say.
Right.
A lot of hurdles
So
to make that work well.
it's possible that there are other games being developed that we don't know about that are in this same sort of stage as Star Citizen, trying to figure out how to make this work on a larger scale.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
Yes.
That's
Some of them, of course, already have something working.
right.
I'm not sure if it's exactly the same.
I think the one that a lot of people in Star Citizen would know about would be Dual Universe. I'm not sure if that's server meshing,
Right.
but I know they've kind of talked about the same idea.
Yes, I actually forgot that. Good that you mentioned it. Yes, of course, Dual Universe. That one might be the only game I know of which has a functional dynamic server meshing implementation.
And how is it?
Yeah,
Do you know?
I think it's fine. It's working good, but I think the performance is a bit lacking.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I'm not sure if it's the issue with server meshing itself or if it's like rendering or something else. Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts again, right? Where things can go wrong.
Right. So if CIG was able to successfully get dynamic server meshing working for Star Citizen, they had a great showcase for it. Obviously, they would get a lot of marketing for it because people love to say, whether it's positive or negative. People like talking about Star Citizen when it comes up. Do you think they would be able to leverage it and possibly use or lend out that technology, sell it, or um, give licenses for the engine?
Hmm. Yeah, it's something I thought about as well. I think they have some of their software they already license out, like their AI logic, I believe. Not sure if something else as well. Again, motion capture studios they could rent out, right?
Yeah,
But in terms of
so
the
big.
yeah, in terms of the game engine license, yeah, of course, that would be cool. Especially looking forward to us modding the game if that's ever going to be a thing. That would be cool.
Yeah.
I would like doing that. But yeah, not sure it's up to CIG if they want to get their engine into a public facing state. It's like a lot of work to. It's one thing to have an engine you use internally and change up whenever you want, and having something you have to present to a wider audience that uses it. Maybe far down the line, I think it will take a while.
Yeah,
But yeah,
because you
it would be cool.
you got to make sure it works all how you want it to, lock it in,
Hmm,
and then make all the documentation to teach other people, right?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that
I
that
guess
would be
it.
a lot.
Yeah, indeed. I think it would be cool to have like spin up your own charts. That would be cool. Like have an easy UI website where you just pay a certain amount of money per month and have your own chart up and running. Private chart, I guess.
Oh boy.
That is something in the far future too, I guess, but
You
that
know
would
what?
be less work involved.
You know what that reminds me of? Actually, not as well known. Twitch, or rather Amazon, actually sells a service that basically replicates the functionality of Twitch, and people can
Hmm,
use that in their own applications. And I wonder if that would ever be possible for CIG to be like, you're not necessarily making another shard in Star Citizen, but we will allow you to spin up kind of this empty space area where you can develop within our
hmm,
own engine environment. That would be cool.
hmm.
Would love
Okay,
to see
yeah.
the Star Wars kind of stuff that would come out of that.
Yes.
But at the
I think
same,
in general, like space sci-fi always suits well for such technology because
yeah.
like you have this vast space you can separate people in. Yeah. It's
But at the same time, they technically are still using the lumberyard engine. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I know there's so much legal stuff that goes on with
yes.
how this engine came from Crytek and how Amazon got it, and now it's Star Engine. So I don't know about all that stuff, but it probably is a little bit more complicated because of the history of the engine, huh?
Yeah, I would say so. Like there was so much reworked, even in the old CryEngine. As I said, we don't take any new features from Crytek CryEngine because the code changed so much.
Yeah,
Or I remember some saying like new developers that had prior CryEngine experience uh, yeah, didn't recognize parts of it anymore and had to adapt to it with the new code. So yeah, I think the same happened with Lumberyard. I think most of the code CRG is developing now internally, and yeah,
yeah. I can't
it's
wait
more
for them
Star Engine.
to. I can't wait for this engine to be finished because we can see it being built, and you can kind of tell that they're making it their own engine, but on a wider scale, it's not really acknowledged as that. And
Hmm.
I'm excited for CIG to be able to actually polish this engine and be able to have it speak for itself because it's just been
Hmm.
so much freaking work, so long.
Yes, so many people for so many years.
Yeah. I
Hmm.
guess actually this is something I've been wondering for years now. Um, from your experience, and you said you aren't necessarily a game developer, but have some experience in understanding how this all works. When it comes to building a game engine, how long would you think it would take? Just spitballing it. Obviously, that's a
I
loaded
don't know.
question.
Yes, I guess. Yeah, looking at other engines, like even the Unreal Engine has some functionality nowadays similar to client object container streaming. Also more on the networking front, less on the loading, I believe.
Hmm.
Uh, so I think that in general, the industry is moving more and more toward more capable engines. Um, yeah, but it's always tricky to exactly outline how long an engine takes. Like with
Yeah.
each new requirement, you like add more complexity to it, more moving parts you have to figure out. Uh, yeah, it's getting complicated pretty quick, especially if you want everything persisted.
Right.
Uh, like, I think that adds a lot. So it would also extend the timeline.
You brought up Unreal Engine, which just released Unreal Engine 5, I think, like 2 years ago, maybe 2020,
Mm.
21, something like that. But I'm pretty sure Unreal Engine 4 came out in like 2006 or 2007 ish.
Hmm.
So I always look at those kind of timelines and wonder to myself, how long were they working specifically on functions to build up to Unreal Engine 5? And then how do you compare that? Obviously, it's not apples to apples, but compare that to how they've been working on what they call the Star Engine for this game. Because the timelines
Yes, of course.
always seem long, and
Indeed.
engines
Yeah.
always seem to be built on top of themselves.
Yes. I get it's fair to say they didn't throw out Unreal Engine 3 and build Unreal Engine 4 from scratch, right? Or
Yeah,
the same for the next version. Like Unreal Engine 6 will be built on top of Unreal Engine 5. There will be code that will be thrown out, but it's always easier to build on top what you already have, right?
yeah.
And yeah, depending what the engine is supposed to do, I guess that will also dictate what features they will add.
Yeah.
If there was like a huge requirement for something like dynamic server meshing, then I guess those engines would already have such functionality out of the box. But yeah, I think
Which
it's still niche enough to niche that these big engines support this themselves.
which is to
But
say,
yeah,
if they did decide to adopt Unreal Engine 5 for Star Citizen, they would basically have to start over on trying to get server meshing working inside of that engine.
yeah, they would have to uh, find a way to make that work. Yeah, like a lot of object container streaming would have to be implemented again, I think.
Don't do that.
No.
We don't need that.
Yes.
Okay,
Like there are
well,
little bits and pieces set out different, I think, and would
yeah.
have to need work.
So let's talk about static server meshing. First step in this sort of new idea of Star Citizen, and hopefully something that we see in 4.0, but it sounds like it might not be in 4.0. Over time, have you noticed the idea of static server meshing changing, or has it felt pretty solid?
Static server meshing has been pretty solid, I think. There were like a couple Spectrum dev comments since 2018. What was always going to be the game world was always going to be split into different sections, and each section would be simulated by one game server, and the section would stay static in size, and I guess the number of game servers would also stay static or fixed, and only with dynamic server meshing later that would be more dynamic, I guess.
So this was basically exactly what you said before. There would be zones in servers or in star systems, and they would all kind of like say one planet would be a zone, another planet would be a zone, and you
Mhm.
would just move in between these zones.
Yes, essentially, yes. There
So
would be
then,
like a handoff, some authority transfer between those zones.
okay. And then dynamic server meshing would basically be the same thing, but those zones could move based on how many players were in each place.
Exactly. Like there would be a service that would reassign those zones to different game servers. So some zones would move between game servers, I guess, not only players between game servers.
Okay.
That's a good way to put it, actually.
What do you
Mhm.
how trying to figure out how to ask this? Um, do you expect them to be able to hit static server meshing kind of when they're expecting?
I don't know.
Obviously, we have nothing to
I've
think.
always have always been too optimistic about this, so at this point I'm trying to also be very careful with any predictions.
That's what
But I
I'm
hope
trying
they
to
will
do.
make it,
Yeah,
of course.
that's why I'm asking you.
Yes. Yeah, again, it's so many moving parts. We only have so much information to work with. I hope they make it till end of this year. That would be very awesome. But with the information we got on the jump points, how they want to roll those out first, it might take a little bit longer. But yeah, we will
Yeah,
have to see.
I
Maybe
didn't.
they will surprise us and we get those jump points in the middle of this year and proper static server matching end of this year. But I we have a record of this taking a little bit longer. But
I
we
can't.
usually get there, so that's always nice.
I can't wait for a second session to learn more about this because I'm still I feel very confused as to what they mean by the whole jump points before static server meshing thing and
Hmm.
how that's gonna work out.
Indeed, yes.
Because especially because we've been being told the whole time like we need server meshing for Pyro.
Yes. I hope that already uses a lot of the functionality that would also be used in static server meshing,
Yeah.
rather than developing its own solution, I
Mm-hmm.
guess.
Just
But
for the
yeah,
sake of
I
getting
don't.
Pyro out, yeah.
Yes, but again, I don't know the exact requirements they have. So yeah. I would like to know more about that.
Okay.
You hear me? Hello,
Yeah.
CRG. Please share more
Help.
information.
Give us a call.
Yes.
Okay, so server meshing is a service that has been pointed to a lot as something that is going to help the game. You do something in the game and like there's desync and an object disappears, or you try to join a friend and you get bugged through your space station and die and kicked out. I don't know. Weird things happen in the game, and a lot of times you hear people saying, "Hey, that's based on the back end. It's based on how the servers are running. They aren't able to keep up." All that kind of stuff. Are you of the same mindset that this kind of alleviation of network, I guess, bottleneck from server meshing could help with a lot of these problems that make Star Citizen just feel so glitchy?
Yeah, some parts, I think, sure. I think NPCs will benefit from that. Maybe also some other timing parts that are dependent on higher tick rate. But for the most part, I think a lot of the bugs have to be ironed out in the gameplay code or other tech code for those features.
Okay.
So I don't think server meshing will fix all the bugs. So
Not
it's
all the
more like a
bugs.
performance. Yeah, not all bugs. Uh, yeah, so they will still have to go into the code and fix those issues. I think that's still something that will happen toward beta and within beta. I think we
I
will
think
see those fixed.
one thing that excites me most on that front is, like you said, they still have to go in and fix those bugs, but at least from what we're seeing with PES, server meshing will expose more abilities to do that. So like with persistent entity streaming coming in, we can see that like missions teams are starting to pick up on that and work that into their gameplay. We can see that some of the other teams around like cargo and stuff are starting to be able to tackle bugs and issues that maybe they weren't paying so much attention to before PES. So I'm excited to see that, like the other side of server meshing, and see what stuff they can start to fix more quickly.
Yes, and how much more features they can add into the game, more
Yeah.
locations. And I think that's going to be a big deal. More mission givers that actually work. I think that would be also
Mm-hmm.
be great. We heard a lot about those, right? They seem to be actually working on them again, so that's nice to hear.
Yeah, thankfully. Gosh, the mission givers are a great thing for the game because general missions get boring pretty quickly, but
Yes.
it's been rough, like knowing they're there and not really being able to take full advantage of them for years now.
Yeah. Moby class doesn't talk to me like that. It's always nice to have like proper interaction with an NPC.
Yeah. Um, what are some of your worries when it comes to server meshing?
I guess that doesn't scale quite as high as anticipated or expected. Especially on the dynamic server meshing front, right? There's going to be some more work on the replication layer to be done, like breaking the replication layer apart and having that be difficult word, scalable services, I guess.
Yeah, horizontally scalable.
Yes, that's a replication layer version 2. Uh, I think depending on how well that goes, we can expect more or less players per shot. And yeah, I think that would be something I'm looking forward to. And in general, like one other thing would be the performance on the client. That will always be like the last bottleneck. I think there will be a lot of optimizations concerning object container streaming in this regard. Like how much information does our client need to know
Hmm.
to reduce the load it has to compute.
It
So
definitely,
those things. Yeah.
this definitely sounds like a case of we're going to get this technology. I guess this is what's happening with persistent streaming, but we're going to get this technology of dynamic server meshing, and then we're going to take a while to fully realize its
Mm.
possibilities.
Yeah. Is it like now there will be smaller features which will be ironed out and optimized and added in. Like even the zone system and object container streaming will be optimized down the line. It's
So,
optimized. It's being optimized now, right? It's going to. I expect it to continue. Let's say it's that way.
so this is the kind of feature people should be setting their expectations for years of development on.
Sure. Even if we like get dynamic server meshing, a first version in 2 years, then I expect them to work like many more years on it and improve it and change systems out, try stuff out. Yeah, to
It's going to
improve
be
it.
interesting because that's going to be, I mean, I imagine the feeling of development up until now, development has felt slow. And a lot of that was going into developing the engine in the background. And we can see feature development starting to pick up. And I'm thinking once they get dynamic server meshing done, um, and they start, as you say, going into this optimization phase and this building phase and just realizing what's possible, I could see it feeling like a completely different sort of phase of development
Hmm.
because
Yeah,
everything's going
definitely.
to be different.
Yes. Is it finally the content gates opening up?
Right.
I'm not sure.
As
Yeah,
as
maybe.
as we like to fantasize
Yeah.
the floodgates open.
Mm-hmm. Maybe.
um,
Like
do you
but even in even in like dynamic server meshing, there might be little steps in between, right? The first version might just be the zones being handed off between game servers, but maybe not the amount of game servers changing initially. So
okay,
there could be like little different features rolled out sequentially. So it won't be all on everything at once, I
right?
think.
We'll definitely start to hear more of these small items that they mentioned, kind of like we heard like 64-bit and iCache and
Hmm.
network bind calling before.
Yes.
So
Like
get
they
ready,
even
folks.
mentioned,
More
yeah.
marketing lingo, as they say.
Exactly. We know about dynamic server meshing V1 and V2 already, right?
Right.
So,
Hmm.
yeah.
So what do you think of beta? If we talk, and it's a crazy thing to mention, but like, and we talk about dynamic server meshing taking 2, 3, even 4 years to reach its full potential, then what are you thinking in terms of timelines for a possible beta?
Mm, that's a good question. I think once dynamic server meshing is online, I think that's a good spot to look at all the other gameplay features and professions. I think getting more professions in the game, that is going to be a big deal. To essentially say, hey, this is our initial version we would like to release, polish, to bug fix. Yeah,
Kind of like their
but I
minimal
think,
viable product.
yeah, exactly. That's what they call it, right? That's what they're looking at, which professions are required to have a functioning economy. Yeah, but
We
I
need
think
that.
I think dynamic server meshing is definitely required for beta. So I don't expect it. I wouldn't expect a beta before that is in
Yeah.
one form or another. Yeah.
And how realistic do you think their idea of a single shard is, or even past realism? How necessary do you feel like that is?
Yeah, I think regional shards, regional shards would be nice. Single regional shards, like having just one game world, one universe per region, like Europe or uh, US East or US West. I think that's possible. It's always difficult, of course, when people gather up in one location. We will have to see how that performs on the client, I guess, more so, less so on the server. I think for the most part, the servers will be fine, but the clients I'm worried about more. Like it's probably going to be possible, but how are our frames going to be? It's a question, I think.
As long as
Um,
as long as the I guess like the 30 series graphics cards can run the game in 4 years, then it shouldn't
yes,
be too expensive.
exactly. Yeah, maybe another part, like the global chart, is also like what's on our mind a lot, right?
Mhm.
Everyone playing in the same game world, anywhere from anywhere in the world.
Oh my gosh.
That would be cool, but I'm not sure if that's necessary. Like you said, I think most people will have fun in regional charts just the same. Um, as long as people are freely able to move between charts, like they don't have to pay for it, like in other games.
Oof. Yeah.
I think that's going to be fine still. It's
Yeah.
probably going to be annoying, but I think
Being able. Sorry.
yeah, yeah, it's a latency issue, I guess. That's like it's a big issue, right?
Yeah. Physics that.
Hmm.
Dang it. Hate you.
Yeah,
um.
I guess yeah.
Well, the I mean, as long as there's like thousands of people on your shard, I don't think you would really notice if the economies are connected between each shard. You can move between each shard, and there are thousands of people on each shard. Uh, do you really think it would be that noticeable that there's not a single shard?
Mm, yeah, I think so. Yes,
Yeah.
of course. If you have like some great events going on in one chart and you
Hmm.
go to that place and you don't see it happening there,
Yeah. Okay. That's fair.
unless like I don't know, CLG finds out a way to have NPC mimic what happens in other charts. Uh, but yeah, it's I think it will be fine
There's
for the most
definitely
part.
there's definitely a lot of challenges ahead for them. But overall, I'd like to hear your final thoughts on kind of how you feel about how they've done and how the outlook is. What's your takeaway overall?
I'm fairly happy with how it's going. I think they tackled the right technological problems in the right order.
Hmm.
I think we are approaching the top of the mountain. Um, I'm looking forward to how it plays out. I think that's mainly what we can do. I'm looking forward to getting a more stable experience as well. And
Same,
yeah,
same, 100%. What's exciting? Um, Thank you so much for joining me for this hour to talk about server mesh and give people a little bit more insight into where it came from, what it means, what's going on with it. Uh, Before you go, this presentation you made, you're actually working on an updated version that's more friendly for mobile, right? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
yes, of course. I think I've been working on it for the last couple of weeks. I know about some issues with the presentation, especially on mobile, where it has some issues not loading, for
Hmm.
example, or being too small and people can't read it. So yeah, I'm working on like a web scraper which lets me extract all the content and put it on a different format on a different website. I was hoping to get that done already, but it still needs a little bit of work. Uh, yeah,
Well,
classical software issue.
for those who are maybe watching this episode in the future, once that is available, I'll make sure to have it linked down below for you. And it sounds like it's going to be a little bit more graphically based. So this is a fairly word heavy presentation, lots of reading.
Mhm.
But the new one sounds like it'll have more kind of infographics and stuff to help people visualize it.
No, it will be exactly the same. I guess
Oh,
it
okay.
will just be not this crazy presentation. It will just be the same text, same images, but in a different format. Like
Okay.
the sources will be nicer. You will actually have links you can click on in each tag
Cool. Well, that'll be
instead
good.
of the references. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Unobtainium, thank you so much again for joining me. I think this is really valuable information. I hope everybody who was watching enjoyed it. If you are watching on YouTube, got a little bit extra context with the video. If you're listening on an audio platform, though, that is ad free, so that's a nice experience. But I'll make sure to link the video in that show notes as well as if you'd like to see some of the actual graphics of this. And if you would like to get to see these podcasts live, our supporters are all able to sit in here live, ask questions, and join us for our Q&A session that happens after the podcast. So consider checking that out on Patreon or YouTube down below. But Unobtainium, I want to say thanks one more time. And if you have anything or any resources that you would like people to know how to find you, are there any?
Yes. I have a Spectrum post about this presentation. You can always find me there. You can write me a personal message if you have any questions. And yeah,
All right.
see you in the verse, I guess.
I will have that all linked down below as well. Thanks again for joining us for the Launch Sequence podcast, folks. I'll see you in the Q&A. See you next week on the next episode, or I will see you for our special coming out this week as well. Either way, appreciate you all being here. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you later.
Thanks for having me.